Honestly, I have no idea what in the world I'm doing. Nor do I even have any remote clue about how I'm going to go about this without going on unnecessary rambling or something stupid or mundane like that. I've honestly never really gotten that interested or even remotely used to computers to begin with, so my typing really wouldn't be as good as I'd like it to be. Also, I want to apologize more or less if there's nothing really that particularly interesting, but this kind of more or less happened relatively quickly, so don't expect this to be too long, which for most of you is probably a good thing. Even then, though, I'm very grateful that I have a good friend of mine who's willing to help edit out my mistakes and everything else about this, so that at least all of you could really understand it a little bit better. Even then, though, I've debated with myself if typing this whole thing up would even be a remotely good idea to begin with. I mean, while I might not get into any kind of legal trouble because of this, there's still a chance that Angus could find out about this post and, well, do things to me that I don't think would really be appropriate to type down on this site. Regardless, though, I honestly think I could at least take whatever he's probably going to plan to give me anyway. And knowing how messed up in the head this guy is, I don't think that that's going to keep me quiet. I don't think keeping quiet will really do much good for me, other than continue to mess with my head for days on end. It started off relatively simply. Back when I was around 15, in my sophomore year of high school, my parents had continuously been pestering me over and over and over again to try and find some extracurricular activity at school to join in. Which, given the fact that I suffer from personal anxiety and a little bit of PTSD because of what a former friend, quote unquote, had done to me back many years back that thoroughly messed with my head, I wasn't really particularly interested to go and join a group where I'd have to sit there and be stuck with a bunch of people that I didn't know and, quite frankly, probably didn't even like. However, given how parents tend to be, and my parents' controlling nature and the like, as most parents tend to act, they basically threatened me with punishment if I didn't find something to remotely join. Yeah, not really could I really couldn't do very much without having to stir up a lot of issues and things like that between me and my parents that would ultimately continue to keep getting heated until something screwed up happened. So I wound up picking up the only thing that remotely seemed interesting to me, and by that I mean the only remote, somewhat social kind of place I could get myself into, and that was Film Production Club. Why that club, I honestly can't explain why. Maybe it's because I was sick of having to constantly hear the babbling of my parents and just wanted to ultimately shut them up, or because of the fact, like I mentioned before, it's the place with the least amount of people. When I had wound up signing up for the club, I will admit that I had mentally kicked myself repeatedly for choosing something that I thought at the time would be a complete and utter pain. However, much to my surprise, the place in the club was actually really enjoyable, and it wasn't really that difficult to pick up, despite my, well, limited knowledge with computers, even now. In fact, I'd even say that I was a little bit unnatural, doing this kind of thing. Which I guess is probably the reason why, due to my advanced nature of this, despite the fact that I'm not that great with typing, I actually managed to sit there and go to college and, well, get a master's in this kind of thing. Now, the classes themselves are honestly pretty great, and I learned a lot from my, as I call him, professor. I learned animation, drawing, editing, various other audio and visual effects, and various other things as well that helped me improve on some of my social skills. Well, it did until I met Angus. Yes, that is the guy's name. He was a relatively short guy, a bit scrawny, with really puffy brown hair, and a pimple-covered face. He was also dressed in school clothes most of the time, and that's pretty much the best description I could give him. Not only that, but my goodness, Angus was a weirdo. And I don't mean that to be rude or anything, he was genuinely weird on many different levels. How was he weird, you might be asking? Well, for one, he was the kind of kid that had a very, interesting take on various assignments that we were assigned to. He'd simply sit there and, while he knew what he was doing, would oftentimes try and come up with something that was either some sort of weird fetish material, or would go out and create something with the intention to try and shock the ever-living hell out of the rest of the production club at school. One example of this was when we were all assigned to try and create something short from Blender while attempting to manipulate the lighting and a couple of other tasks our professor had told us to do. Well, about a week afterwards, Angus winds up coming in with a small video about 10 seconds long about a giant foot that craps out ice cream. Yeah, like I said, he was as weird could be. Now, despite that, he was somewhat relatively harmless. Of course, as all would expect, due to his odd behavior, he wasn't very well liked by a lot of people in the group. In fact, he wasn't liked very much by a lot of people in the school itself. Now, before anybody asks, I did try my best to befriend him and actually provide some kind of support. I mean, anything I could probably do. I may not have liked the guy too much, but I'm not a cold, heartless person to sit there and just not want to be friends with somebody because of their differences. Unfortunately, despite my attempts to look past his problems and giving him as many chances as I possibly could, he was way too much to deal with. He was someone that acted like more of a creep whenever he was around me. Not only that, but he took a very creepy liking to me, which was really inappropriate, and something I don't even really like talking about. Well, as you would expect, the friendship didn't last very long, and I wound up, never talking to him for at least a good few months. That is until me and Angus were paired together for a group project in film production, in which we were given the task to create something from our childhoods to use in any kind of plot in a cartoon that we could come up with. Certainly this was an odd project, but nothing that wasn't expected for a class like this. Now, of course, since this was a joint project, I had to work with Angus on the whole thing. However, to my shock, he worked on the whole project himself. He wouldn't even let me work on anything for it, no matter what I said or what I did. Of course, I was inwardly panicking at the time because, knowing how he is, I really didn't want to have to deal with explaining something absolutely disgusting or raunchy to the rest of the production class. So for my own sake, I took some time to create my own project to show the teacher, just in case there were any kind of issues with Angus's work, because heaven forbid I get dragged down in the lowest part of hell because of this man. About a week or so of work, which is only the amount of time that we had, me and Angus were both finished with our projects, and thus we were able to get pretty much everything ready for the project that was due. When it came time for us to present our projects to the professor at our club, Angus simply handed the disc over towards the guy, and then he proceeded to motion for me to sit down at one of the desks. As my professor clicked on the file, a part of my soul died inside of me at the idea of what insanity the meat-named monster had made. But in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have had any remote expectations because, my goodness gracious, it was a lot worse than what I expected it to be. The first thing that caught my eye when the short film started playing was a sudden intro, or well, at least a poorly animated Blue's Clues intro, with Angus doing a really horrid Steve impression during the process of the intro, as well as using clips from the actual show for Blue's lines. Just looking up at the group of teens in our classroom, I could already tell this was going to be a train wreck. Once the crappy intro had ended, the scene then transitioned over to show the camera panning over in a slow motion over to where Steve's front door was at, before the sound of the doorbell rang out and Steve opened the door. Once he opened it up, it ultimately revealed the same poorly animated Steve character introducing the viewer, before immediately being invited into the house. It's then that Steve proceeded to introduce himself and his little blue dog by the name of Blue. Now, for the majority of the episode, there really wasn't anything that particularly interesting about the episode. If I really had to go a bit of a summary of this, the episode was basically just them going on, well, I wouldn't even really say much of an adventure. Not only did it seem that this entire episode was completely and utterly half-baked when it came to animation quality, but the entire concept itself in the episode, at least up until the end, wasn't really well played out. It's like it's like Angus tried to come up with something interesting but failed. But if I could piece something together, even though I'm extremely confused about what he was trying to point out to begin with, it was basically Blue and Steve going off and trying to find another flavor of ice cream or something to have for their, I don't know what it is, TV party or something. Like I said, this guy was weird, and a lot of the stuff in this did not make any remote kind of sense. And if I were to sit there and go into extreme detail discussing this, your heads would explode, like mine did whenever I was watching this. However, with that said, there really wasn't particularly interesting about the whole thing. Up until the ending, which is where things got really messed up. Close to the ending of the episode, the scene then cut to show Blue making her way over towards a large doghouse near the sandbox. When she makes her way there, she looks to the side, and then nudges a small door in the front of the doghouse and then proceeds to walk inside of it. The scene then immediately cut to the inside of the doghouse, which is where everyone in the classroom, including my professor, nearly lost our minds. The inside of the doghouse was filled to the brim with heavily detailed scratch marks all over the place. Fecal matter was scattered in various corners of the place. Urine stains practically stained the entirety of the interior of the wood. And an old bowl that sat at the very edge of it was filled to the brim with moldy dog food inside of it. Blue simply looked around, rather sadly, before grabbing a small rag out of a tiny little hole, dipping it a little bit in a small rag in a nearby water bowl, which was nearly empty, and then Blue began to wipe away at her fur, cleaning off some of the spots that were on her face and body, revealing either a few scars, a laceration or two, or dark purple bruises all over her body. "What the hell?" my teacher muttered, which was pretty much the only word that anybody could really say, as everybody, including myself, was in a deep sense of shock at how, well, crazy this all went. Blue then proceeded to groan a bit before lying down right next to the pile of feces next to her. This, of course, didn't last too long before Steve, in the same voice of Angus, yelled out to Blue in an extremely angry manner, causing the young pup to flinch a bit before getting up. Blue then slowly proceeded to make her way over towards the house, to which she entered into. Now, everything immediately went from 1 to 100 rather quickly before Steve immediately grabbed Blue and then proceeded to beat her. A lot. With the sounds of stock dog whimpering playing out as it did so. This lasted for at least a good 2 minutes before my professor immediately walked up to our projector that was showing the thing, turned it off, ejected the disc, and then proceeded to put it back into the case before immediately glaring at the both of us and telling us in a rather harsh way to stay after the club was ended. Which, of course, Angus did without really much any kind of complaints. Me, however, I was ultimately losing my mind, at least interiorly. Mostly because of the fact that I was not in the mood to sit there and get any remote kind of heat over something that I myself personally didn't even remotely make. Well, to kind of more or less wrap everything up, I was able to leave that room completely and utterly unscathed, followed by ultimately saving my grade in the process. Yes, there was a grade that was given out. Why? I don't know, but that's something that was given. However, after it was found out that Angus was the one who had made the entire episode, without even remotely allowing me to help him or make any remote adjustments at all, he wound up, well, how do I put this? He basically not only wound up getting a detention for his actions, but was also barred from film production club for the rest of the school year. As you would have expected, he did not take that well, and even went so far to violently threaten my professor, repeatedly, I myself actually had to get in the middle of it a couple of times just to make sure of it, that he wouldn't actually do anything. And to make matters even worse, as if to put lemon juice on that salt that he had already put on that wound, he actually attempted to attack the professor. I don't know if this was some kind of meltdown or something like that, but obviously it did not go well in his favor. Angus was shortly expelled from school after he had done that. And the last thing I actually do remember seeing him was him crying outside of the schoolyard, practically waiting for his mom to come and pick him up from the school. Now, as for the rest of the episode, I wasn't shown any more of the thing. In fact, last time I checked, it wasn't even remotely handed back to Angus, it wasn't handed back to me, and I'm quite sure the production teacher, my professor, ultimately wound up getting rid of the thing. Which, in retrospect, isn't really that bad. Not only would I never want to look at that thing, I don't even want to have anything to remotely do to associate with that kind of person. It just makes me wonder, though, what the heck was going on in his mind when he put that in there? I mean, I know that it might sound kind of crazy to kind of overreact in the manner that I'm overreacting because of just that simple clip, and I know that there's tons of other people who tend to use that kind of topic, but the way that he did that, and the fact of the matter that everything went out and just kind of more or less slammed us all in the face in that one short film, there was a lot of things wrong with it. A lot of things wrong with the guy. And if anything, despite the fact that he really freaked me out, I genuinely do hope that he's gotten whatever kind of help he could get, and that he's doing well in society. Like I said, I don't wish any remote kind of negativity or any kind of issues or whatever on the guy. Who's to say that he might not have had a mental disorder or something like that? Who knows, to be honest. But I can certainly say one thing, though. Despite my best wishes for him, I'm really, utterly hoping that I don't ever meet this guy again. But I do understand that some people might be a little bit confused, so if anybody has any remote kind of questions, please ask me. I'm willing to answer them as best as I possibly can. I genuinely will. All you need to do is just ask.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping horror-driven nightmarish gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.